Hello there, welcome back. In this video, we're going to see look at a few more examples of classes and objects. So in the previous video we discussed an example of bank account class where we created this bank account class and we played around with a few objects for this class. And the class UML diagram looked something like this. We had this class name bank account and we had all these properties and all these methods inside the class and we saw how we can instantiate an object for the class and play around with the different properties and use all these different methods inside the class. Now in this video we're going to look at three more examples. So now for the second example I have this second class called as employee. So I'm going to create an employee class and the properties under this class are like first name, last name, and email ID, salary, and increment amount. So and also we have another method called as increment. And now let's go through each and every property and let's understand what they are. So we know first name and last name of the employee, and email ID is something that we're going to derive using the first name and last name, and I'll show you how to do it. And we're going to have a salary, so employee is going to have some salary, so that is stored in this salary property. And like obvious enough, every employee gets some increment annually. So we are storing that increment amount percentage, the percentage by which the salary is incremented. That percentage is stored within this variable increment amount. And the method increment actually adds that increment amount to the salary that the employee has. Okay, now let's look at the class in Python. So we have the class employee and we have the constructor or the init method, and we have the arguments first name, last name, and salary. Okay, so we are taking first name, last name, and salary of the employee as arguments. And then within the class, so I'm not, we have the other two arguments, the other two properties, which are email ID and increment amount. Okay, so I'm making the increment amount. I'm creating the increment amount variable or the property within the class. I'm not taking any argument for this because the increment amount percentage is going to be same for all the employees. So I'm creating the class in such a way so that every object or every employee is going to have the same increment amount percentage, right? Now, and we have the salary. We are going to take the salary because each employee might have different salaries. So we have the salary passed in as argument, and we are creating the email ID by appending first name and then a dot and then the last name, and by ending with @gmail.com. So if let's say our employee first name is John and second name is Doe, then we are going to have the email ID as john.doe@gmail.com, right? Simple enough. So we have all the properties here. Increment amount as 7%. I'm just putting it as 7%, just a random figure. And we have the first name. We are creating the property first name from the argument that has been passed in. Similarly with the last name and salary, and we have created the email ID property. And coming to the method increment, so what I'm doing here is that to the salary, I'm adding uh, self dot increment amount, which is 7%. Okay, so 7% of the salary. Okay, so 7% of the existing salary is incremented to the salary. So it goes under that calculation. So I'm calculating the 7%, which is a self dot increment amount percentage by 100 times the salary, and I'm adding this amount to the base salary, right? Now, if we run this class, and I'm trying to instantiate an object for this, so I'm giving the first name as John, second name as Doe, and I'm giving the salary as 30,000. Okay, so now I have created the object for this, and if I try to access all these different variables, sorry, I mean all these different properties of the object, and I'm printing them out down here. You can see all the yeah. So the email ID has been created as john.doe@gmail.com, and the salary is 30,000, and we have the first name and last name respectively. And now if you see, the salary is 30,000, and then I'm calling the increment method on this employee class. Okay, so I'm sorry, the object, the employee object. I'm calling the increment method on the employee object, and then I'm printing out the salary. Okay, so we should expect an increment of 7% to this base salary. Okay, so let's just see. There we go. We have an incremented amount of 7% for this base salary. So initially it was 30,000, and after we apply an increment to the employee's salary, we got 32,100, right? All right. So that was our second example. Now let's look at another example. Right here, I have another class called as developer, which is very similar to the employee class, just a small just a few modifications here and there. So I have the developer class and I have the properties first name, last name, email ID, salary, increment amount, same as the employee class, right? And I have an extra property here, an additional property called as programming language. Okay, so a developer is also one kind of employee only. So we have all these common properties here, and we have, since a developer actually develops programs, develops softwares, he's also likely to know one programming language or more. So I'm also adding another property called as programming language, in which we'll store the programming language that the developer actually knows. And we have the increment method as usual. Okay, so let's see the code for it. So we have the developer class, same as before. We have the init method, which is very similar to the employee classes init method. We are taking the first name, last name, salary, and we are also taking the programming language as one of the parameters. Okay, and this time I'm going to switch it up a little. Okay, so for the developer, I'm setting the increment raise amount. The percentage for the increment is 15%. Okay, so for the employee, the increment percentage was 7%. For the developer, I'm setting it as 15%. Okay, so developer has earns more than the employee, so I'm going under that assumption. So I have the first name, last name, salary, and email ID is also created in the similar fashion. First name dot last name at the rate gmail.com. And I'm also saving the programming language as one of the properties. Simple enough. And the increment method is the same as before, right? We are taking the increment amount percentage, and we are adding that to the base salary. Okay, now let me just run that, and I'm instantiating an object for the class developer. So I'm calling it as D1, and I'm passing the first name and last name as Walter White. That is a Breaking Bad reference if you have seen it. And I'm setting the salary as 50,000, and I'm setting the programming language as Python, obviously. Now, if I run this and I try to print out all the properties, you can see we have all the properties created. First name, last name, Walter White, email ID, walter.white at the rate gmail.com, salary 50,000, programming language Python. Now I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing like adding an increment to the salary. So now I should see his salary incremented from 50,000 plus 15% of 50,000, right? So that should be somewhere around, yeah, 57,500. So as you can see, 15% of 50,000 has been added to the base salary, which is 50,000, and we got an incremented amount as 57,500. Now I just want you to see here. I just want you to observe that we are actually repeating ourselves, isn't it? So we are actually repeating ourselves, repeating all of this code that is already there in the employee, right? We are repeating all of that in the developer class, and we are just adding one more line, or we are just changing one or two lines here and there. But all of that is repetition, and repetition is always not encouraged in coding. Okay, so so you will try to reuse your code as much as possible. So that is a good coding practice that you should follow. So there is a lot of repetition, and we can reuse the employee class instead of coding all the common lines again and again. So now here I'm going to introduce you to a concept called as inheritance. Okay, so we have the employee class in which we have all these properties and methods, and we have the developer class in which we have almost similar kind of properties and methods. So instead of writing all over again, we can simply inherit all the methods and properties from the employee class into the developer class. So that is called as inheritance. Inheritance is nothing but reusing all the properties and functionalities or methods of another class into our base class, into our current class. Okay, so what I'm doing here is that the class developer is inheriting the first name, last name, email ID, salary, increment amount properties, and the increment method into its own, so that it can reuse, like it can make use of all these properties and methods as if it was its own. Okay, so instead of coding all of these things into developer one more time, I can simply inherit it, and I can add some few changes that I need to make in developer, and I'm done. Okay, I don't need to write, code all of that properties and methods again. I can simply reuse a code by inheriting the employee class. Now let's just see the syntax for doing so. So here we are. So for inheriting, all you need to do is follow this syntax. So we have the class developer, and to inherit the employee class, so what is happening over here is that the developer class is inheriting employee. So the syntax for that looks something like this. The developer class, and then followed by parenthesis, and inside the parenthesis you need to give the class from which you are inheriting. So I'm inheriting from employee class, so I'm giving the employee class name over here. All right, now I'm defining the init method or the constructor, and I'm taking the argument same as before, like first name, last name, salary, and programming language. And now instead of now here comes the difference. Instead of coding all of this, all of this here, I can simply take the first name, last name. See, okay, I can simply take the first name, last name, and salary and pass it to the init method of employee. Okay, and how do we do that? Very simple. So if you see the inheritance here, so developer is inheriting from employee. So developer is a subclass and employee is a superclass. Okay, so the nomenclature looks something like this. The developer is a subclass here and the employee is a superclass. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to call the init method of the superclass over here. The superclass is employee. So we are syntax of this looks something like this. So I'm calling super, which is the employee class, dot init method. Okay, so I'm calling the init method of the employee class, and I'm passing in these values, these three arguments into it. Okay, so all these three arguments, the first name, last name, and salary, are going to go into the employee classes init method, and they are going to get instantiated over here. Right, so all of this code is going to run in the init method, and mind it that we are also creating the increment amount of 7 by default, as it is happening in the employee class. Now we are going to overwrite it since it's a developer class and we want the increment percentage to be 15% for the developer. We are going to overwrite it with the increment amount of 15%. Okay, so let me just go through that again. So we are inheriting from employee class and we are defining our init method, and inside that, before doing anything, we are calling the super class. Okay, we're calling the super classes, which is employee classes init method, by passing in the first name, last name, and salary. All right, and then we are defining the increment amount for the developer class as 15%, and we are creating the argument programming language, uh, and we are storing the value that has been passed in the arguments here. We're creating the property programming language, and we are giving it the value passed in the arguments, and that is all you need to do. So you see the difference. Okay, so previously without inheritance we had to code all of this part, which is a waste of time and highly inefficient. Rather than doing that, you can simply inherit from the employee class and reuse all of that code, and you will end up with only this much amount of code with the exact same functionality, right? So inheritance is powerful in such ways. It is very helpful in reusing the code and like reducing the redundancy part in your code. So let me just run that, and I'm creating another developer here. So first name is Jesse and second name is Pinkman, and the salary is 40,000, and the programming language is Java. And this will work in a very similar way as the class that we created previously. Okay, this will work in the exact same way as the previous class. So I'm trying to print out all the properties here, and you can see I have all the properties properly created, like Jesse as a first name, last name is Pinkman, and the email ID is jesse.pinkman@gmail.com, and we have the salary and programming language. Now let's try out the increment method as well. Let's see if the increment method is also inherited from the employee class. So 40,000 is a base salary, and if I run this increment method on it, we should get an incremented amount of 15% to the 40,000. And as expected, we have 46,000 as a salary, incremented salary for the object D2. So you can see how inheritance can actually help you reduce your code and make it more efficient instead of reusing your entire, instead of rewriting your entire code again and again, right? So that is how inheritance works. So in this video, we saw a few examples of OOP. We coded a few more classes like employee, developer, and we saw how we can, make our code more efficient using inheritance. And that is it in today's video. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.